Welcome to Ageless. I'm Dr. Jonquille Chantrey, and this is a podcast uncovering the truth about healthy aging, self-development, and medical aesthetics. Today, we're talking about food and taking a realistic but science-backed approach to the truth that what we choose to eat becomes part of us. Our skin, our cognition, our longevity, and affects our experience of the years that we live. There's a lot of advice out there about ideal diets and complex nutrition, but it's often conflicting and overwhelming. And how much of this is truly practical to incorporate into daily life and financially viable for most people? Working in aging science, I invest time reading the nutritional literature to support my patients. And given the sheer level of debate, I wanted to share some important evidence whilst being inclusive of different personal choices, be it omnivores, carnivores, or plant-based, and also mindful of those with conditions and intolerances. When researchers look at some of the longest-lived populations in the world, in regions such as Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, and Icaria in Greece, known as the Blue Zones, they find striking commonalities. These communities share diets built primarily around plants, vegetables, beans, nuts, lentils and grains, with modest amounts of fish or animal products. Significantly, these meals are part of daily rituals of connection, and food is a crucial part of their communities. By contrast, in the UK and much of the Western world, at least 57% of daily calories now come from ultra-processed foods. Among teenagers in Britain, that figure climbs to almost 2/3 of their total diet. A large-scale population-based cohort study over 30 years, published in the British Medical Journal, linked high consumption of ultra-processed foods to increased risks of obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and premature death. These foods displace the very things that help us thrive: protein, fiber, and the diversity of nutrients that feed our gut microbiome, which affects immunity, inflammation, and even mood. And of course, this is the paradox. On a basic level, in modern societies, we already know how to eat for longevity. Fermented foods such as sauerkraut, kefir, or kimchi have been shown in a Stanford study to improve microbiome diversity and reduce inflammatory markers in just 10 weeks. Yet many people still reach for foods that are quick, cheap, and comforting for so many personal, emotional, and socioeconomic reasons, not necessarily because they don't care about their health. So my question isn't just what should we eat, but how do we make health-span foods as easy, as comforting, and as tasty as the ultra-processed products that dominate our modern life? How do we help people retrain their palates so that beans, greens, and herbs feel as satisfying as pies, pizza, or cake? That's what we're exploring today. And to bring this to life for you in a truly actionable way, I'm so delighted to be joined by chef, broadcaster, and food innovator, Simon Rimmer. Simon has built a career around making food joyful, approachable, and delicious, while also living with the very real pressures of time, work, family, and being in the public eye. Together, we're going to discuss how to bring the wisdom of longevity populations and the science of nutrient density into the kitchens of busy modern lives without losing the pleasure of eating. And remember to please subscribe, like, leave a review, or share this conversation with someone you love. Simon, thank you so much for coming on to Ageless.
I feel a bit of my depth. What an intro! I've made loads of notes just from what you were saying, because there's so many things that resonate with me from the start.
Well, the reason why I'm so excited is because you've spent a lifetime in making food interesting, making it relevant, but also I know you're super interested in nutrient-dense cooking, and there's so many buzzwords around healthy eating, and I know you want to dispel some of those myths.
I suppose one of the big ones that is really starting to take effect is the low-fat products.
Yeah.
So there's some terrifying evidence that 50 years ago, if you were to remove products in supermarkets that had added sugar in them, you would lose something like 18% of the products on the shelves. Now, it's somewhere in the region of 65 to 70%. Because obviously, low fat invariably means higher sugar. Mm-hmm. And our body doesn't process that very well. So it might well be that you're having less fat, but our body needs fat. But you're taking on loads of sugar. So you're sitting there eating a low-fat diet that is actually piling weight on you. Palm sugar, processed sugars, etc., etc. And that's always been a big one.
Speaking actually about yogurt as one of the first ones, there was a study out of Yale in 2023. It was a randomized controlled trial. And it showed that one high-fat and high-sugar yogurt per day for 8 weeks altered the brain reward circuits. So it created more cravings and it primed the brain to learn about other types of reward. So just one yogurt a day for 8 weeks was impacting more cravings. So that was just absolutely to your point.
Wow.
Yes.
At the end of the day, the industry wants to sell more products.
Yes.
And I'm not decrying the food industry. It's a magnificent industry. But it's incredibly hard to legislate because, again, that whole thing that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for everybody. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single person would create more cravings, but there is a chance that it might. And it's such a minefield.
It's so complicated. And it's like you said, if we think that the beauty industry and the cosmetic surgery and aesthetics industry is chaotic and a bit of a Wild West, well, food, my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of harmful additives, I mean, just absolute nightmare.
Well, I think a good general case in point is if you're going shopping for food and you pick something up and look at the ingredients. If you're buying something that is pre-prepared, so it's a processed product, whether it be ultra-processed or just processed, look at the ingredients on the pack. If you can't find them in your cupboard, there's a fair old chance that there's a good reason not to buy it. And I'm not saying everything, because there are certain things like cheese will have certain preservatives in it, which is good for kind of the way in which bacteria develops.
Yes.
But in general terms, if you're looking at something that you think, okay, I'm going to pick up this ready-made lasagna, you go, I don't even know what that is. You know, at the end of the day, if it isn't saying beef, flour, milk, cheese, pasta, you're going, what are all these other things? So I think as a general rule, trying to kind of analyse what you're picking up and looking at on the supermarket shelves is no bad thing.
This speaks to everything I speak about in terms of medical education and within my practice and within my clinic. It's about bringing that information and taking that moment to become more informed. But I'm wondering how many people you speak to actually look at the ingredients list.
I don't think we do, because you're looking and you go, there's a lasagna, I fancy lasagna for my tea.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. However, I think one thing that's really, really important to say, because I think it's very easy for us to sit here in a very privileged, educated world and say, okay, this is what we should all be doing.
Yes.
But I think what's also really important is that we have to give people the opportunity to eat well. So one of my big bugbears, if I ruled the world, which is I'm a couple of years off, I would only allow all of the big supermarkets to open one of their massive hypermarkets outside of town on the proviso that 5 times a week they bring a bus into low-income areas full of fresh fruit and vegetables and produce, so people have the opportunity to buy fresh fruit and veg. I'd go one step further and also encourage them to actually create cookery lessons for people so they learn how to use those ingredients. We have 3 generations of human beings in the United Kingdom who have never been taught to cook, and for whom their only opportunity to eat is cheap, quality, processed foods, which bring no nutrients into themselves or to their children. And you said in your intro about the obesity crisis that we have, that teenagers having over 50% of their calorific intake is ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
We're creating that.
3/4, yeah.
You know, that isn't just people saying, I can't be bothered. We are not giving people the opportunity to do it. And until such times as a government is brave enough to say, right, okay, Mr. Sainsbury's, Mr. Tesco, Mr. Waitrose, yeah, you can have that massive outside supermarket, but how is this low-income family with 2 small kids going to have to get 2 buses to get to your supermarket, then it's loaded up with shopping and do the same thing back? They go, I can't do that. That doesn't fit in with my life.
This is exactly the reason I want to invite people who feel this level of social responsibility, who realise the politicisation of health, and who are here to really educate for everybody. And it starts with information, and it starts with access to that.
Yeah.
It has the ability to.
I don't think anybody in the United Kingdom goes to a fast food takeaway and thinks, this is good for me.
Exactly.
They go, this is cheap. I've got no money and I can get a kid's meal for $2.99, they'll get a toy, and the kids will be full. No one is doing it deliberately. No one is sort of saying, I don't care, I'm just going to eat that for the rest of my life.
I agree with you entirely. And I think, again, from privileged positions, people can just assume that these people are making, we all make bad choices. Yeah. Unless I see people who are basically orthorexic, you know, they are so obsessed that they are living a very limited daily lives. And I'm very concerned with regards to the health span and the longevity space, because people are starting to actually change their eating habits for primarily supplements. You know, obviously they're fasting a huge amount of time. We know there's good data on that, but their entire lives are changing around this central obsession around living longer, but they're not actually living for today. Back to your point, people do have good intentions, but as I said, there's so many different psychological, there's emotional aspects. People are very busy. We're living stressful lives. The level of stress is increasing significantly. For those people who aren't interested in cooking at all, and maybe from a generation's perspective, you know, 3 generations, that's a long time that people don't know how to cook. They have like a kitchen fear, and then they become ashamed of not being able to cook. Please help us understand it.
I think almost the cooking side of it is far easier than the decision about what you cook, I think, is just as important.
Right.
So I think in general rules, if you fill up your store cupboard or whenever you go to the supermarket, you look at a good level of protein. So you're looking at kind of like, you know, lean protein. So you're looking at oily fish, you're looking at chicken, you're looking at various white meats. And then grains are really, really important. You know, we don't eat anywhere enough grains, you know, lentils, chickpeas, any pulses, whole grain rice. And again, a really good thing to have. You do need some fat in your diet. Don't be afraid to have, but I would always go for full fat butter. I would go for olive oil. I wouldn't go for reduced fat spreads because, again, they're an ultra processed food. I would go for fermented products, which again you mentioned in your intro. So have something like kimchi in your cupboard, which is a great thing to have, or sauerkraut, or any kind of pickle really. So you're allowing your gut to actually activate itself, which is such a good thing to do. There's nothing wrong with having sweetness, but I think, again, look at using more naturally occurring sugars. So look at things like honey, look at things like palm sugar, which is less processed. So things like that work incredibly well. And I think if those are your starting points for what you buy, then I think there are very simple things that you can cook. It's very easy to put a piece of chicken in the oven and it's delicious. Chicken is really, really easy. Or equally, things like stir fries are a brilliant thing. You know, so you've got loads of kind of bright coloured vegetables. If you think you just fry off some chicken and then fry off some onions, some peppers, you put some leafy greens in there, you have some noodles in there, you've got a really, really healthy, delicious kind of flavours. So I think it's almost like get the ingredients right and then almost look at kind of, okay, what am I going to cook? And I think as well, batch cooking is a really great thing.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about batch cooking. But just picking up on a couple of your points before, I think it's also important when you're talking about fats, you know, they're such an important part of our health because they make up our cellular membranes. They are critical points in terms of the cellular processes which impact all of our organs. And then ultimately, you know, what we see on the outside, we need to actually be putting different types of fat on our skin, not obviously from food, but from the right kind of topical products. But, you know, this all has an interplay and eventually it will show through the skin.
You know, coming back to batch cooking, they're great for defrosting things. But if you're going to cook, say, for example, you decide you're going to make just a very basic tomato sauce to have with pasta.
Okay.
So rather than say, okay, well, I'm going to make enough for you and I to eat for our tea tonight.
Yes.
Then times that by 5. Portion up and put it in your freezer. Learn to love your freezer is a really good way to create good habits. So you're not going, oh, I can't be bothered cooking that. Go, oh, you know what? We've got 5 more portions of that pasta sauce sitting in the freezer. And it's a really good thing to do. And freezers are brilliant. And in fact, when you're shopping in supermarkets, frozen food in general terms has far less process than ready meals.
This is what I wanted to ask you about, was how you felt on frozen vegetables.
Frozen is brilliant. Absolutely great. Frozen peas, they reckon, are actually more healthy for you than fresh ones. because they're picked and frozen straight away.
Is that right?
Yeah, so they have many nutrients that are retained in them. The whole kind of ultra-processed chill cabinets is where that ultra-processed food thing happened. And the reason for it was, when you're walking down the supermarket aisles, the chill cabinets, you can see pretty packaging. Whereas in a freezer, you're scraping off the ice, so it was never appealing. So as soon as the chiller cabinets go, wow, that looks nice. You know, that lasagna looks amazing, as opposed to, what if they've got a frozen lasagna in there? So there's a big difference. But learning to love your own freezer at home, batch producing and using a freezer is a great way to harness really good nutritional food that you can create in batches and freeze and defrost, and you're still keeping all those nutrients in it.
You know, going back to your point as well around the chilled aisle, when looking at the ultra-processed additives, etc., all of the different chemicals that are involved in that, it was really interesting that one of the main reasons as well is not just taste, but it's cosmetic reasons. Essentially, they are cosmetically modifying the food to make it look more appealing. Because they are so nutrient poor, they may come out more grey or more beige or more bland looking. But to bring it to life, they are actually cosmetically enhancing the food. So not only are they cosmetically enhancing the packaging, the actual food itself.
That's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is. But I mean...
But it's a classic marketing tool, right?
Exactly that. All of it comes back to cost. We're driven by our pockets. You know, and if you're in a supermarket, and I keep talking about lasagna, and you've got one lasagna that's $1.99 and one that's $3.99, but your budget says I can only afford the $1.99 one, that's what you're going to do. And, you know, how deep our pockets are is probably the biggest factor in the way in which so many of us eat.
What kind of recipes would you recommend that are nutrient dense for them?
Well, you can buy the same thing, that fish is probably the best fast food that there is. There isn't a piece of fish that you need to cook for longer than kind of 8 to 10 minutes. Which is the same amount of time it would take you to death scroll on your phone for a little while to pick up your emails.
Yeah.
And whilst they are processed, I think that a lot of the pre-cooked grains and rices are really, really good, which is like a minute and a half in a microwave, or indeed they take 2 minutes in a pan if you don't have a microwave.
Okay.
Those are brilliant. And vegetables are quick to cook.
Yeah.
Nobody is too time poor to cook well. And to cook with good nutritional intent. There's absolutely nobody, I don't have the time. Of course you do. If you've got the time to order a takeaway and stand in the takeaway and pick up, or wait for it to be delivered, that time you do. Okay, the shopping is a slightly different thing. But I think you have to take your priorities, don't you? And I think another big one is staying hydrated. I think hydration is such a massive thing. I mean, there's loads of evidence that sort of says a lot of the time when we snack, we're actually dehydrated rather than actually being hungry.
Most definitely. And I think that it's a good, helpful measuring tool. Often in medicine, we're taught that the average person needs 3 litres a day, you know, for adequate hydration. So even if it isn't actually buying an expensive electrolyte, but getting a lemon and adding the fresh lemon at different points in the day, so it's not sat there all day, but at least that will help to drive the water molecules directly into the cell. And of course, there's going to be some antioxidants from the lemon or the orange or the lime. So that's a small way to improve your hydration, but also have some degree of electrolytes and antioxidants at the same time.
That's a great tip. I like that.
And the other thing was, you've talked quite a lot about meat, you know, as a primary protein source, but you've also talked about lentils and grains. Now, you had a really standout Manchester institution restaurant for so long. I think it was over 35 years.
Yeah.
Greens, it's just incredible. A vegetarian restaurant. So what I love about this is that you can speak to being, you know, omnivorous, that you can be a carnivore, but also you led in terms of bringing to the consumers. I mean, you had consumers coming from all over the country, didn't you?
It was quite phenomenal. I mean, we were inadvertently groundbreaking. I mean, I've never been a veggie, and I mean, the history of Greens was that we were looking to buy a restaurant and we had no money fundamentally, and Greens was cheap. The 2 guys that owned it wanted to sell. They had a buyer fall through, so we had enough money to buy it.
Right.
And I fell in love with vegetarian cooking very, very quickly. I think back then, when we opened in 1990, vegetarian food was very much about what you couldn't have. And I felt from the outset, well, that seems really wrong. Why don't we start about what you can have? So, it would be that, well, you can't have meat, you can't have this, you can't have that. I said, well, why don't we say, yeah, but you can have great pulses, great fresh ingredients, amazing cheeses, herbs, fresh vegetables. And so our whole ethos was about saying, well, let's celebrate what we produce.
But you were also bringing, again, more information, more opportunity to such a broader audience of consumers, because people were coming to you who wouldn't necessarily have always just eaten vegetarian food at home, but they were having a more enriched experience of what nutrient-dense, vegetable-led food could be.
Thank you. I mean, we always sort of said that the easiest people to impress in greens were middle-aged blokes.
Right.
And that changed over the years, but certainly in the early days,
because
in the 90s.
Because of their preset prejudices
yeah,
and ideas.
when you'd sort of see that there'd be, two couples and the two wives have sort of said, we're going to go for a veggie. And go, veggie, I'm going to be hungry, blah, blah, blah. And then they would eat this exciting creative food. And then they go, I can't believe that was vegetables. We were very much on the front foot of leading the way.
You absolutely were.
But by default, we didn't set out to do that, but it was just, by the creative process of what we did. And I am dead proud of it.
Yeah, you absolutely should be. I think
it was the greatest kind of 35 years ever. It really, really was.
Absolutely. So because of that knowledge and that experience, were there any standout ingredients or dishes in particular that you can kind of inspire us with?
Well, I think more what we learned, more so than specific ingredients, was the fact that all ingredients aren't created equally. So, tomatoes are really the best example. We all sort of say, tomatoes don't taste of anything. Well, tomatoes that are grown in a polytunnel obviously don't taste as good as ones that are grown in a natural environment.
You taste it when you're going through different places in Europe.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So I think that it was learning about why ingredients differed in quality and price. And I suppose coming right up to everything that we're talking about, I think that buying the best quality you can afford is a really good thing to do, because you'll get better taste from them, you'll get better quality, and they'll have been treated better when they're grown. So I think that was the biggest thing. I think the other big change that happened during our time at Greens, an unfortunate reason, is the advent of BSE and foot and mouth meant that a lot of dairy farmers on the other side of that would go, right, okay, what we're going to do? So, okay, well, why don't we start producing cheese? So the artisan British cheese movement really happened after 1992.
And in terms of that, what about the increase of reported lactose intolerance cases? How do you cater for that? I mean, giving a bit of backdrop on this, there is a lot of discussion within the scientific data that actually the majority of people, arguably, are lactose intolerant, but there's a group of people whose ancestors from Northern Europe were able to break down lactose. And so if you have one of those inherited genes, then perhaps you're more likely or more able to digest lactose.
Well, again, I think one of the things that I'm always slightly confused about is it feels that in the last 20 years or so, we seem to have a society that has become more intolerant than it should be. And I can't decide whether, has that come from the advent of ultra-processed food? How did it come from the fact that we have mild intolerances that we no longer need to actually contend with because restaurants have become so much more adept at actually dealing with them? Or do we have another problem where you're going, okay, why are there so many more people who seem to be seriously gluten intolerant and seriously lactose intolerant? Where has that come from?
I think it's like everything within the health space and within medicine and epidemiology. You have aspects where there's more reported cases because there's more awareness. You have increase in self-diagnosis. And again, that's related to trends. And so, again, there's data, there's been studies that have shown people who aren't actually lactose intolerant will still report symptoms even when they're blinded and it's a placebo, etc. So I think there's increase in reporting. I think there's increase in trend. I think definitely in terms of the chemicals that we're consuming, but not just in terms of food, but in terms of beauty products, etc. Our environment.
It's your fault.
No. I try to advocate for better sustainability in the environment and for patients in terms of topicals.
I've never thought so. I think that's really interesting. I've never really considered how products that are not consumed could have such an effect on you.
Awful. And I think that is going to be, it's already started, that there's much more investigation within that space. But when you really start to break down some of the ingredients that are in these topicals, it is absolutely frightening. And when I do a lot of topical R&D, bring product formulation to market in big clinical trials, and it's difficult because you have to include some things in order to be efficacious, right? So if you've got unstable ingredients, you need to have some things that will allow it to actually penetrate and to be safe and effective. But certainly in terms of the work that I do and the companies that I work with, I'm always looking at that as well. So it's definitely something to be aware of.
That's blown my mind.
Ingredients on the back of beauty products.
I've never thought about it in that
And often
way.
they don't necessarily list, it's not all necessarily listed. And it depends on what market you're in and depends what region you're in. So yeah, there's all of that. I think the other thing is that from an environmental perspective, we know that there is significant increased inflammation. So in terms of the chemicals that are around us within the atmosphere, in terms of the global warming debate, all of these things are impacting. And of course, our skin is our first defense to those external aggressors. So if we have skin disease or impaired skin behavior, part of this inflammation then means that there's more inflammation happening within the inside as well. So I'll have patients that present with things like psoriasis, with eczema, rosacea. There may be some degree of genetic component, but when you actually look at their dietary, their dietary habits and their lifestyle habits, there's a lot that's in there that's going to be stimulating it. So to answer your question, I think there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and that does make complete sense. Does it change as well as we get older? Because I know that my reaction to food is very different now at my age than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. So I think it's more around our understanding of the gut barrier. So as you're aware, the microbiome, this is our natural bacterial sort of environment, our ecosystem. But that is very, very sensitive to the foods that we're eating. And if we have an overgrowth of unhealthy bacteria, then that will impact the actual nutrients, how we can absorb them. There's other things that are at play. So like with any form of barrier, when it becomes impaired, it either will absorb too many things or it won't absorb at all. So, I see in my practice, there's a lot of patients who will present with low zinc. And you can see that then they have other inflammatory disorders, and that will really impact the nutrients that they're absorbing. So these patients might have really healthy diets, really be well considered. They're doing all the things that you're recommending, but actually there are other things at play. And I think that's where the power of things like the fermented foods, there have been really strong evidence that shows that it gives more diversity to that ecosystem so that then you can absorb your nutrients better and then you're going to be benefiting overall.
I mean, certainly I've sort of found, again, when with all the kind of cooking that I do, particularly cooking in the media, that more and more I'm finding that there's more and more stuff that I'm starting to use ferments in recipes again, because people mess me all the time and sort of go, can you do something with fermented food?
Okay.
Because again, now we're getting an awareness of it. So on one hand, we start this conversation about, isn't it terrible that we're kind of ignorant about things? But then when something is starting to gain scientific evidence to it,
it's really good. That's where the science of nutrition is super positive. And I think when there are really good studies, and really good data, then that is really helpful for steering health overall. Give us some tips as to how to incorporate some fermented foods into our dinner or into our lunch.
You need to do no more than use things like kimchi or sauerkraut almost as an accompaniment. Treat it in the same way as a vegetable or as a salad ingredient.
Right.
Just incorporate into it. I mean, I will have spells when I will literally just have a big old forkful of kimchi, just as a matter of course, just to have it there. I think
love Korean
having
food.
them around you all the time creates habits. Another aisle that I've started looking at in supermarkets is the free from aisle. That always I regarded
It's getting
that
bigger.
Yeah, I always regarded being that as like, well, that's not to do with me because I don't need anything free from. But when you go down there now, then you'll see that there are many great products that they're for everybody. Okay, they start with a specific intent, but almost if you sort of feel that I'm not sure if I'm slightly intolerant to gluten or to lactose, or whatever it might be, trying a little swap out and see if it actually help with the issues that you have.
I recommend that to my patients actually quite frequently, because there'll be certain, as I said, there'll be certain signs on their faces where, there's increased redness, there's increased pustules, so more breakouts, etc. Their skin barrier is starting to break down, they're getting dry skin, all sorts of other things are starting to show. And I'll ask them, what's your gluten intake like? Have a little think about if this is happening after you've had possibly MSG. These things will be rather anecdotal, but within clinical practice, this is also valuable, and often there's quite a clear correlation.
Yeah.
And they might not have a pure clinical diagnosis that they are definitively celiac or etc., but it can really, really help with their symptoms.
Because I think as well, even if it isn't a serious intolerance, I think that almost just by changing it slightly, it then will help with other things. You talk about absorption of nutrients. So if you're finding that you have a slight intolerance to gluten or lactose, by actually removing that, then you remove a lot of the symptoms. And it doesn't mean you can never have gluten again, but it helps with everything else that's going on with your body. Which is the principle of Chinese medicine a lot of the time, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I think there's so much to be learned from the Eastern philosophies with regards to the gut-brain axis as well. So we know, of course, the level of absorption of nutrients and the level of serotonin and the microbiome, it's such a complicated process, but it has direct links to our mental health and our brain function. So that then plays into, if you're feeling better and you're feeling healthier, then you're more likely to probably make better choices with regards to the ingredients and making time for prioritizing your health. So I think those downward spirals, it actually shows up with regards to the gut-brain relationship.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of think that, I think sort of probably 5 years ago, I figured that I needed to sort of change. I've always eaten pretty healthily, but I decided that I just needed to kind of like simplify what I ate, I think is probably the best way to describe it. So rather than having multiple ingredients, I found that I actually reduced a lot of what I took in and made sure what I was doing was very nutrient rich. And I do sort of feel that I feel in better shape now at 62 than I was when I was 55.
So it's almost like a little bit of a minimalism approach rather than, if we compare it to the overconsumption and overconsumerism, maybe you found that helpful to bring it back to those basic principles of minimalism.
And I'll still eat spicy foods and I'll still eat hot foods and I'll still eat all the things I liked. And again, it's purely anecdotal. Yeah. But the thing that I found by reducing, if you like, the number of ingredients and processes that I go through in kind of making something, that it has actually helped. Not that I've felt particularly unwell, but I feel better and more energized now. I certainly feel like I have more energy.
Yeah, and this comes back to the personalization of everything. Whilst there are universal things that we know are going to be good for us and whatever, but because there's so much information out there and so much noise within this space, then how do we choose what's right for us? Well, actually, maybe we'll feel better at the time, right, over time. I really need to ask you about hyperpalatable foods. Now, we've talked about processed foods. How do we make healthy foods tasty? And how do we swap out for those of us who love sugar and salt?
Always a recommendation, if you're trying to reduce the amount of salt that you take in, is to look at bigger flavours. So have more herbs. It don't have to be fresh herbs, they can be dried herbs. Look at things like smoked paprika, which is such a great kind of massive kind of flavour. I'm a massive fan of miso. So,
yeah, me too. I love
so
it.
miso has that incredible
Love it.
umami, and even if you were making yourself a sandwich, almost just if you think, okay, I just got to reduce the amount of salt that I want to put on my sandwich. If you just let miso down with a little bit of water and almost just use that instead of a spread, it's brilliant as a sandwich.
Yeah.
So miso is superb. I think also acidity is a really good thing.
Okay.
So I think lemon zest, lemon juice really kind of bring flavours out.
citruses. Okay.
I think having different vinegars is a really good one. So the flavour that you'll get from something like a cider vinegar is very different to a balsamic, to a sherry, to a Chardonnay vinegar. And all of those will add little things. So
Different sweetness, different salt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that if you're making something and you're thinking this tastes a little bit bland, normally what people do is they'll add more salt to it or they'll add more ingredients to it, where in fact quite often what you just want is a little bit of acidity. So I would sort of say if you were making, say, a bolognese sauce, just for ease. So if you think, this tastes a bit bland, but I don't want to add more salt into it, a little half teaspoon of even malt vinegar into that opens out the flavour so much. I think the hardest diet to change, or if you are a beige food person.
I was about to just ask you that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about people who are around me and close to me who they like to eat the same things. They don't like anything too spicy. And of course, we need to be mindful of the neurodivergent community who often they do want that consistency and they'll say, they like the beige food, etc., the colourless food.
Yeah.
So, so small little changes.
I think little changes are always the thing. And I don't even think I think the worst thing you can say to people, unless it's for medical reasons, is you've got to change your diet wholesalely from now. And I think it's about saying, okay, well, what would happen? I mean, coming back to what I did, okay, I'm a chef and I like all kinds of food.
Yeah.
But I think I did it little by little. I thought, I wonder if I actually, rather than have 9 ingredients, or if I have 6. And then if you go the other way, okay, well, if I don't really like vegetables, what can I do to get me to that point? What vegetable can I tolerate? How do I get myself to this point where I need to have more nutrients in my body? What can I do that will make them acceptable? Is it that I need to kind of roast vegetables so they have a stronger flavour? I think it's little steps. I think if draconian changes don't work, and I think telling somebody they're wrong all the time, none of us like to be preached at.
I couldn't agree more. And definitely I'm like that with my patients. It's all very well if I'm very dogmatic about it and say, you need to be doing this, and, you need to be following that. It's just not realistic.
No.
The last point, it kind of goes on from with regards to your family and with regards to your lifestyle. You think that bringing it back to community and back to connection is so crucial. And we found that in, those other areas that I was mentioning that have longer health spans.
Wherever possible, eating with another human being is a good thing to do, and equally celebrating the fact that you're doing it. I don't think food should be a chore. I mean, one of the projects that I got involved with a few years ago, a really lovely primary school right by Liverpool Football Club's ground called Anfield Primary. Okay. And again, it's an incredibly low-income area. The only food they're getting is the food that they're having at school, and they're going home, then there is nothing there. So we set up a community dinner programme. So every Thursday night, we cook proper, good, nutritional meals. So any child that's in the school and the parents and any siblings and any family members can come and we feed them.
Brilliant.
We feed them for free.
Brilliant.
And then they take home a goodie bag with good ingredients that they can then go and use.
They've had such a positive experience.
Yeah. What was massively beneficial for that, not only were they getting good nutritional food, is the fact that they saw the gathering together and eating together as being something that was a shared experience, that was a positive experience. So I think that, for me, if nothing else that comes out of what we talked about today, I think that there's an awful lot of society where that doesn't happen anymore. It's not the same to sit down with a pizza box in front of you, in front of the telly.
No.
I think actually make time to sit at a table and eat food and talk while you're at food. So that whole experience of food becomes part of, not only from a nutrition and health point of view, but from a problem-solving mental health point of view. And that experience is so powerful. Yeah. And I think that we should never, ever lose sight of that. That whole thing about family dinners, family with a small F, are really important. That shared experience of putting your phone down, turning the telly off, sit down, shared experience with food and what that leads to, I think is so powerful.
I have last question. What does ageless mean to you?
You see, I quite celebrate getting old because I think that that whole adage that that youth is wasted on the young, and I kind of get it now. That kind of makes sense, and I think I like the fact that being ageless means that whatever age, whatever decade you're in, that you can celebrate that. And I'm fortunate in that. I don't think that everybody is in the lucky position I am. But I think for me, I feel that I'm as happy in my 60s as I was in my 20s, and that's a great way to be ageless.
And I think it's also testament to a life well lived, paying it forward, but also healthy eating along the way.
Always.
Simon, thank you.
Pleasure. Absolutely loved it.
I hope you feel encouraged that eating for health span doesn't necessarily need to be complicated or joyless. I'm so grateful to Simon for inspiring us that with a touch of creativity, the very foods that give us calmer gut, clearer skin and sharper thinking can also be comforting. He's also reminded us that perhaps most importantly, about the joy and connection of sharing food with those we love. So here are 3 simple steps you can begin this week. First, remember the fascinating study out of Yale. Just one high-fat and high-sugar yogurt a day created more cravings and rewired the brain for more reward and turned it off low-fat food preferences. Stop and think about the high-fat and high-sugar snack combos. Second, start by swapping just 3 meals a week for vegetable-rich dishes. Perhaps try one of Simon's recommendations. Think of varied vegetables as the main focus. And if you want to add meat or fish, this as the accompaniment. And third, embrace quick longevity meals and snacks. Build a 10-minute bowl with beans, greens, healthy fats, and herbs. Swap sugar for dates, cinnamon, or fruit, and swap salt for citrus, spices, or fresh herbs. Remember, small changes, repeated often, can reshape our microbiology and microbiome. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe, share it with someone you care about, and let us know the questions you'd like answered in future episodes. As a thank you for being here, you can also redeem an exclusive free skin consultation and enjoy 15% off the One Dermafacial for your anti-inflammatory skin health with my team at One Aesthetic Studio. Simply follow the link in the show notes and enter the code Nutrients15 at checkout. And so I leave you with this reflection. How are you going to prioritize your skin and brain health through food today? I'm Dr. Jonquille Chantrey, and this has been Ageless.